You'd been planning the proposal for months, saving every spare dollar from your modest salary as a graphic designer to buy your girlfriend Emma the perfect ring. Working at a small boutique agency meant you weren't pulling in tech company money or finance bro bonuses like some of Emma's friends' boyfriends, but you had a job you loved, steady income, and enough to build a life on. The ring, though, that required sacrifice. You'd researched for weeks, visited dozens of jewelry stores, and learned more about cut, clarity, and color than you ever thought you'd need to know. You couldn't afford the massive diamond her friends all had, the ones with 2 or 3. Carats from their finance bro boyfriends who worked 80-hour weeks and measured success in zeros on a paycheck, but you'd found something you thought was perfect. The ring was vintage, from an estate sale at a reputable jeweler, with a 3/4 carat center stone surrounded by delicate filigree and tiny accent diamonds. It reminded you of Emma's love for antique shops and old movies, her appreciation for things with history and character. The jeweler told you it was from the 1920s, Art Deco style, and when light hit it, the craftsmanship made it sparkle in a way the modern rings in the case couldn't match. It cost you $3,000, which was 3 months of careful saving, skipping lunches and making coffee at home instead of stopping at cafes, taking on freelance projects on weekends and evenings, saying no to concerts and trips with friends. Every dollar that went into your savings account brought you closer to this moment, and you'd never felt better about spending money in your life. When you proposed at the botanical garden, where you'd had your first date 3 years ago, Emma cried happy tears and said yes immediately, saying the ring was perfect and exactly her style. You'd planned it carefully, arriving at sunset when the light turned everything golden, leading her to the bench where you'd sat and talked for 4 hours on that first date, getting down on one knee while the string quartet you'd secretly hired played her favorite song in the background. Her hands shook as you slid the ring onto her finger, and she kept saying, yes, 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 before you'd even finished asking the question. She examined the ring in the fading light, turning her hand to watch it catch the sunset, and told you it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. It's so me, she said, kissing you. It's like you looked into my soul and found the perfect ring. I love it. I love you. I can't believe this is really happening. She seemed genuinely thrilled, and you went home that night feeling like the luckiest person alive, ready to start planning your future together. Emma called her parents immediately, FaceTimed her sister, took dozens of photos of the ring from every angle. She kept reaching across the car to hold your hand, and every time she did, you saw the ring on her finger and felt a surge of pride and joy. This was it. You were building a life with your best friend. The woman who got your sense of humor and your ambitions, who supported your career even when you chose passion over profit, who said she valued experiences over possessions. You ordered pizza, opened a bottle of champagne you'd been saving, and spent the evening talking about wedding plans and honeymoon dreams and the apartment you'd look for together. Everything was perfect. Then Emma's friends saw the ring and everything changed. It happened at a celebratory dinner 2 days after the proposal. Emma's 3 closest friends met you both at a trendy restaurant to celebrate the engagement. Madison, Becca, and Lauren had been Emma's core friend group since college, and you'd spent the last 3 years trying to fit into their dynamic with varying degrees of success. They were all in finance or marketing, made significantly more money than you did, and had a certain lifestyle that involved bottomless brunches and designer handbags and conversations about investments and real estate that you couldn't really contribute to. But they were important to Emma, so you made an effort, even when their subtle condescension made you feel like you were constantly being evaluated and found slightly lacking. The moment Emma held out her hand to show off the ring, you watched their faces shift from excitement to something else, something that made your stomach drop even before anyone spoke. Her friend Madison actually said, "Oh, it's vintage?" with a tone that made it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. The word came out like an apology, like she was trying to find something nice to say about something disappointing. Becca leaned in closer, examining it with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for authenticating suspicious artwork. "What's the carat weight?" she asked, and it felt less like curiosity and more like an interrogation, like she was calculating value and finding it insufficient. When Emma said she thought it was around 3/4 of a carat, Becca's eyebrows shot up in surprise that wasn't even slightly disguised. "That's it?" The 2 words hung in the air, and you saw Emma's expression flicker just for a second, from pride to uncertainty. The third friend, Lauren, tried to be diplomatic, but couldn't hide her disappointment. "Well, I'm sure it has sentimental value," she said, reaching out to pat Emma's hand. The implication was crystal clear. Without sentimental value, the ring would be worthless. It was a participation trophy of engagement rings, something that needed to be defended with meaning because it couldn't stand on aesthetic or monetary value alone. Throughout dinner, Emma's friends made increasingly pointed comments, and you felt yourself growing tense while Emma grew quiet. Madison talked extensively about her own engagement ring, 2 carats, flawless clarity, from Tiffany's, and how her fiancé Brad had spent 3 months' salary like you're supposed to. She held her hand up to let the restaurant lighting catch the massive diamond, turning it this way and that, like she was in a commercial. "Brad wanted to make sure I had something I'd be proud to wear forever," she said. And the emphasis on proud felt like a deliberate contrast to Emma's ring, which apparently wasn't pride-worthy. Becca showed everyone photos on her phone of her friend Stephanie's recent proposal, where the ring was so large she claimed it could be seen from space. The photos got passed around the table with appropriate oohs and ahs, and you noticed Emma studying them with an intensity that worried you. "That's what a man does when he's serious about forever," Becca said, zooming in on a photo. "He makes a statement. He shows the world what she means to him." The implication that your ring didn't make that statement, that it somehow indicated you were less serious or that Emma meant less to you, made you want to defend yourself, but you didn't know how without sounding defensive. Lauren mentioned an article she'd read about engagement, ring regret, and how many women felt their partners didn't try hard enough. She pulled it up on her phone and read excerpts aloud. Statistics about how ring size correlated with relationship satisfaction. About how many women wished their partners had spent more. About the psychology of feeling valued through expensive gifts. "It's not about being materialistic," Lauren explained in a tone that suggested she'd thought deeply about this. "It's about knowing your partner was willing to sacrifice for you, willing to invest in your future together. A ring is a symbol, and the symbol matters. You bit your tongue, knowing that you had sacrificed. That $3,000 was a huge investment for you, but clearly it wasn't the right kind of sacrifice in their eyes. Every comment felt like a deliberate dig, and you watched Emma grow quieter and more withdrawn as dinner progressed. She'd started the evening glowing with happiness, her left hand constantly in motion as she gestured while talking, clearly wanting to show off the ring she'd been so excited about. But by dessert, she was barely making eye contact with you and kept hiding her left hand under the table, sometimes sitting on it, sometimes keeping it in her lap. When the waiter came by to congratulate her on the engagement and admire the ring, she gave a weak smile and a quiet "thank you" instead of the enthusiastic response she'd had just hours earlier. The joy had been systematically drained from her, and you felt powerless to stop it. The car ride home was painfully silent until Emma finally spoke. "Do you think the ring is too small?" The question landed like a punch to the gut. Your heart sank, and you had to take a breath before responding. "I thought you loved it," you said carefully, keeping your eyes on the road because you were afraid of what you'd see in her face. "You said it was perfect. You said it was exactly what you wanted." Your voice came out more hurt than you'd intended, but you couldn't help it. 2 days ago, she'd been ecstatic. Now she was questioning everything, because her friends had planted doubt like a virus. Emma twisted the ring on her finger, and in the glow of passing streetlights, you could see her expression, conflicted, uncertain, guilty. "I do love it. I really do. It's beautiful and unique and so thoughtful." She paused, and you knew a "but" was coming. "It's just, Madison spent 10 minutes showing me pictures of her ring from every angle. She has this whole Instagram highlight dedicated to it. And Becca asked if we could upgrade it later, like it's not good enough now. They made me feel like..." She trailed off. But you knew what she wasn't saying. Her friends had made her feel like you hadn't done enough. Like the ring you'd worked so hard for wasn't adequate. Like she should be disappointed instead of delighted. "Like what?" you prompted, needing to hear her say it. "Like maybe I should have expected more?" Emma said quietly. "Like maybe 3/4 of a carat isn't enough?" "I don't know. I feel terrible even saying this because I know you worked hard for it. And I really do love the vintage style. But they were also underwhelmed. And now I keep wondering if other people will react the same way. If I'll have to explain it or defend it or make excuses for why it's smaller than..." She stopped herself, but the damage was done. Your ring, your carefully chosen token of love and commitment, had become something that needed defending. Over the next few weeks, Emma's friends continued their campaign of subtle and not-so-subtle criticism, and you watched your fiancé transform under their influence. They created a group chat for wedding planning that you weren't included in, which you only knew about because Emma would come home from meetings with them looking stressed and unhappy, her phone full of messages you'd catch glimpses of. "Madison says we should look at the Rosewood for the venue," Emma would mention casually, naming a hotel that cost $50,000 just for the rental. "Becca thinks we should book this. Photographer, he's only $8,000 for the day. Lauren found a florist she says is absolutely essential, but they have a $5,000 minimum. You'd catch fragments of their influence in her suggestions, each one chipping away at the budget you'd carefully planned together. Maybe you should look at bigger venues that cost more. Maybe the photography package should be upgraded another $2,000. Maybe you should reconsider the honeymoon destination because they'd all gone to the Maldives and anywhere else would be settling." Every conversation about wedding plans became a negotiation, with Emma presenting ideas that were clearly coming from her friends, and you having to be the bad guy who said, "No, we can't afford that." You were being positioned as the person holding her back from the wedding she deserved, the obstacle between Emma and her dream day. When you gently reminded Emma of your budget, you were both young professionals, still paying off student loans and saving for a house, down payment, she'd get defensive, in a way she never had before. "My friends just want the best for us," she'd say. And you'd have to point out that the best, according to her friends, meant going into debt for one day. They've all had beautiful weddings. They know what works. You'd counter that beautiful didn't have to mean expensive, that you could have a meaningful celebration without bankrupting yourselves. But Emma would look at you like you were being cheap. Like you didn't understand that weddings were supposed to be extravagant. The breaking point came at your engagement party, which your parents graciously hosted at their home in the suburbs. It was a beautiful backyard celebration with close family and friends, about 50 people, which felt perfect for an engagement party. Your mom had gone all out with decorations, string lights in the trees and flowers everywhere, and she'd hired a local restaurant to cater instead of attempting to cook for 50 people. Emma had said she loved the plan when you discussed it, had been excited about the casual, intimate vibe and the chance for both families to meet properly. You'd spent weeks making sure everything would be perfect, creating a playlist of songs that meant something to you both, setting up a photo wall with pictures from your relationship, even making a signature cocktail you'd named after the two of you. But the moment Madison, Becca, and Lauren arrived, their judgment was palpable, and you felt it like a change in air pressure. They stepped into the backyard in designer dresses and heels too fancy for a casual garden party, looking around with expressions that suggested they were visiting a quaint but ultimately disappointing historical site. They took photos, but you noticed they didn't post any. And when Emma asked why, Madison said the lighting wasn't good enough for Instagram. Becca made comments about how intimate the gathering was, code, for small and underwhelming, and asked if this was everyone. As if 50 people wasn't enough, Lauren wandered around examining the decorations, and you heard her tell Emma, "This is very homemade," which wasn't the compliment it should have been. They made comments about how cozy everything was, which was clearly a euphemism for not impressive. They congregated in a corner of the yard, whispering and occasionally glancing at Emma's ring with expressions of pity that made you want to ask them to leave. When your mom came over to introduce herself and welcome them, they were polite but cool, giving her the same treatment they gave you, like she was service staff rather than the mother of the groom who generously hosted this party. You saw your mom's face fall slightly at their reception, and you felt a surge of protective anger. These people were judging your family, your home, your celebration based on some arbitrary standard of wealth and style that had nothing to do with actual connection or joy. Then you overheard them, and everything crystallized into sharp, painful clarity. You were coming back from the kitchen with more drinks, walking around the side of the house to reach the backyard, when you heard Madison's voice from just around the corner where they'd clustered near the fence, partially hidden by a large tree. "I still can't believe that ring. Emma deserves so much better." The words stopped you in your tracks, and you stood there, frozen, with a tray of drinks in your hands and anger starting to build in your chest. Becca's voice agreed enthusiastically. "It's basically trash. My engagement ring cost more than his car, probably." You looked at your 10-year-old Honda Civic parked in the driveway and felt your face flush hot with humiliation and rage. Your car ran fine, got you where you needed to go, and you'd paid it off years ago. But apparently, it was another mark against you in their assessment of your worth. Lauren added, "At least she can upgrade after a few years when he's making more money. If she waits that long, honestly, she could do better than him entirely." The words hit you like a physical blow, each one landing with precision in all your insecure places. But what came next was worse, Madison said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried perfectly to where you stood frozen. "We need to talk her out of this. She's settling for someone who clearly can't provide the lifestyle she deserves. Emma could have any guy she wanted. She's gorgeous, she's smart, she makes good money herself. Why is she tying herself to someone so mediocre?" You stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, listening to your fiancé's best friends casually discussing sabotaging your engagement and insulting both you and the ring you'd worked so hard to afford. Every word dripped with elitism and materialism that made your blood boil. These were the people Emma trusted most, the ones who'd be standing beside her at the wedding, and they thought you weren't good enough for her, not because of who you were as a person, but because your bank account didn't meet their standards. They'd never asked about your character, your values, how you treated Emma, whether you made her happy. The only metrics that mattered were carat weight, car value, and career prestige. When you finally walked around the corner with the drinks, their conversation stopped abruptly, cut off mid-sentence like a record scratch. They turned to you with sudden bright smiles, and you wondered if they'd known you were there, if they'd wanted you to hear. "Oh, there you are," Madison said with artificial cheerfulness. "We were just talking about how lovely your parents' home is." The lie was so blatant, so shameless, that you almost called her out right there. But you weren't going to cause a scene at your own engagement party, weren't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing how much their words had wounded you. So you smiled tightly, handed them their drinks, and walked away, knowing now exactly what they thought of you and knowing they were actively trying to poison Emma against you and your marriage. That night, after everyone left and you were cleaning up with Emma, you told her what you'd overheard. You'd been debating whether to say anything, wondering if you should just let it go and try to win them over somehow. but the words kept replaying. In your head, basically trash, she's settling, talk her out of this. And you knew you couldn't build a marriage on a foundation that included people actively hoping for its failure. You and Emma were carrying plates and glasses into the kitchen, and she was talking happily about how well the party had gone, how sweet your grandmother had been, how much she liked your college friends. You interrupted her mid-sentence. I need to tell you something that happened today. You watched her face carefully, hoping she'd be as outraged as you were, hoping she'd immediately defend you and put her friends in their place. You recounted the conversation word for word. You'd memorized every syllable in the hour since you'd heard it. When you got to the part about the ring being basically trash, Emma's face flushed, but you couldn't tell if it was anger or embarrassment. When you told her they'd said she was settling and that they wanted to talk her out of marrying you, her eyes widened, but still, she said nothing. You finished with, they were actively plotting to break us up, Emma, at our engagement party in my parents' backyard. Instead of the outrage you'd expected, Emma looked uncomfortable and tried to minimize it. They were probably just joking around. You know how they are. They're just protective of me. They don't want to see me make a mistake. The words felt like a betrayal in themselves, and you felt something crack in your chest. Emma, they called your ring trash. They said you're settling for me. They're actively trying to break us up. That's not protective, that's toxic. There's a difference between looking out for someone and trying to sabotage their relationship because you don't think their partner is rich enough. She sighed, clearly torn, setting down the glass she'd been holding. They mean well. They just want me to have the best. They're worried I'm... She stopped herself, but you knew what she'd been about to say. They're worried you're what? Marrying beneath you? Making a financial mistake by choosing love over a high salary? Your voice was rising despite your efforts to stay calm. And they don't think I'm the best, you said flatly, and it wasn't a question. Emma couldn't meet your eyes, and that silence said everything. She didn't deny it, didn't rush to reassure you, didn't defend you the way a partner should. She just stood there, visibly conflicted, and you realized with sinking horror that some part of her agreed with them. Over the next few days, you couldn't stop thinking about the conversation and Emma's non-defense of you. These friends would be bridesmaids, would be in all the wedding photos, would give speeches at the reception. The idea of having people who fundamentally disrespected you and your relationship in positions of honor at your wedding felt intolerable. You'd tried to like them for Emma's sake, had tolerated their subtle condescension and materialism for 3 years, had smiled through countless dinners where they'd made you feel small. But they'd crossed a line from which there was no coming back. They weren't just judging you privately anymore. They were actively campaigning against your marriage. You finally told Emma, after days of tense silence and short conversations, I don't want Madison, Becca, and Lauren in our wedding. They can attend as guests if you want, but I won't have people who think I'm not good enough for you standing beside us on what's supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. You'd practiced this speech, knew it had to be firm but not angry, clear but not ultimatum-like, even though it essentially was one. They've made it clear they don't support our marriage. Having them in the wedding party would be like inviting people who are rooting for us to fail into our most intimate celebration. Emma's response was immediate and defensive, her voice rising. You can't kick my friends out of my wedding. They've been planning on being bridesmaids since we got engaged. Madison already bought her dress. We've been planning matching robes. For getting ready and coordinating the bachelorette party, and she was spiraling into logistics, avoiding the actual issue. You cut her off. It's our wedding, not just yours. And I'm not going to celebrate our marriage with people who are actively rooting for it to fail, who insult me behind my back, who made you question a ring you said you loved because it wasn't expensive enough for their standards. Emma tried every argument over the following hour-long fight. You were being too sensitive. They didn't mean it the way it sounded, and you were overreacting to friends being friends. You were trying to control who her friends were, which wasn't fair because she'd never tried to control your friendships. You were making her choose between her friends and her fiancé, which was manipulative and exactly the kind of controlling behavior Madison had warned her about. That last one made you see red. This is exactly the kind of thing my friends warned me about, Emma said, and hearing that she'd been discussing your relationship problems with the same friends who'd caused them was infuriating. They said you might get insecure and try to isolate me from them. I'm not trying to isolate you, you said, forcing yourself to stay calm. You can be friends with whoever you want, but I'm not putting people who disrespect our relationship in our wedding. There's a difference between being insecure and having boundaries. If my friends called you names and tried to break us up, would you want them standing next to me at the altar? Emma didn't have an answer for that because the answer was obviously no, but she couldn't bring herself to apply the same standard to her own friends. The fight escalated over days, revealing deeper issues in your relationship that you'd been avoiding. Emma admitted that her friends had been questioning your relationship from the start, your salary compared to their fiancés, your 10-year-old. Car compared to their luxury vehicles, your rented apartment compared to their purchased condos, your lack of ambition, because you were perfectly happy in your career, but weren't chasing corporate ladder climbing or startup millions. They just don't understand why you're satisfied with where you are, Emma explained, and you could hear her friend's words in her phrasing. Most guys our age are trying to level up, make more money, build wealth. You seem content to just stay where you are. She'd been defending you to them, she claimed, but you wondered how much of their poison she'd actually internalized, how many of their concerns were actually her concerns that she was too afraid to voice directly. When you asked directly if she was embarrassed by the ring, by you, by your life together, Emma couldn't give you a straight answer. She took too long to respond, and her eventual, "Of course not," sounded hollow and unconvincing. "I love you," she said, reaching for your hand, but you pulled away. "But is it wrong to want more? To want the kind of life my friends have? To not have to worry about budgets and student loans and whether we can afford things?" The question hung between you, and you felt something fundamental shift in your understanding of who Emma was and what she wanted. "We've always talked about building a life together," you said slowly, "paying off our loans, saving for a house, maybe starting a family in a few years. I thought we were on the same page about living within our means and prioritizing experiences over things. When did that change?" Emma looked away, and you had your answer. It hadn't changed. You'd just been naive about what she really wanted, or maybe she'd been lying to herself about being okay with a modest life because she'd thought you'd eventually make more money. You realized that Emma's friends hadn't created these doubts. They'd just given voice to feelings Emma already had but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. The ring incident was a symptom of a larger problem. Emma wanted a lifestyle you couldn't currently provide, and her friends' constant reinforcement of materialistic values was making her resent you for not being wealthier, for choosing a career you loved over one that paid more, for driving a paid-off Honda instead of leasing a luxury car you couldn't afford, for being authentically yourself instead of performing success. Every time she saw Madison's Instagram posts from expensive restaurants, or Becca's photos from European vacations, or Lauren's stories about her new designer purse, it was a reminder that she could have that life if only she'd chosen someone different. You asked her point blank, "If I never make more money than I do now, if we have a comfortable but modest life, if I can't buy you expensive jewelry and luxury vacations, will that be enough for you?" You needed to know if you were building a future on false premises, if Emma was waiting for you to transform into someone you had no intention of becoming. Emma's hesitation before answering told you everything you needed to know. She wanted to say yes. You could see the struggle on her face, but she couldn't quite get the words out convincingly. "I want to say yes," she finally admitted. "I want to be the person who doesn't care about money and stuff. But I don't know if I am. And I hate that about myself, but I can't lie to you." The honesty was gutting, but also clarifying. You gave Emma an ultimatum, and you delivered it calmly, even though your heart was racing. Either your toxic friends are removed from the wedding party, or there won't be a wedding at all. You let that sink in before continuing. "I'm not trying to control your friendships. You can be friends with them, see them, talk to them. That's your choice. But I can't marry someone who'd allow her friends to disrespect me and undermine our relationship, who can't set boundaries with people who are openly trying to sabotage our engagement. If you can't stand up to them now, you never will. And I won't spend our marriage being made to feel inadequate because I can't compete with their husbands' salaries." Emma accused you of being manipulative, of making everything about you, of ruining what should be a happy time. "This is supposed to be about us celebrating our love," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you turning it into this ultimatum? Why can't you just ignore them?" You sat down heavily on the couch, suddenly exhausted. "Because ignoring them hasn't worked. Because they're in your head now, making you doubt me and doubt us. Because I heard you on the phone yesterday telling Becca that you understood her concerns and would think about whether you were making the right choice. You're letting them convince you that marrying me is a mistake." "That's not what I meant," Emma started, but you held up your hand. "I need you to hear me. This isn't about my ego or about not liking your friends. This is about whether you're committed to me and our partnership or to maintaining friendships that are toxic to our relationship. This is about whether you can prioritize our marriage over people who want it to fail. If you can't do that before the wedding, you won't be able to do it after, and I can't live like that. I won't wake up every day wondering if you're comparing me to Madison's husband or wishing you'd listened to your friends' warnings. Either we're a team or we're not." After a week of tension that felt like it might break you both, Emma made her decision. She told Madison, Becca, and Lauren they could no longer be bridesmaids. The conversation, which you weren't present for because Emma insisted on doing it alone, apparently went as badly as expected. Emma came home 3 hours after leaving for coffee with them, her eyes red and swollen from crying, and collapsed on the couch. "It's done," she said. "They're out." Her friends had been outraged, she told you. Madison had accused Emma of being brainwashed and controlled. Becca had said if Emma was going to choose some guy over a decade of friendship, then she didn't know Emma at all. Lauren had been quieter, but had ultimately agreed with the others. They'd said if they couldn't be bridesmaids, they wouldn't attend the wedding at all. Madison had apparently delivered a final blow. When this marriage falls apart in 2 years because he can't give you the life you deserve, don't come crying to us. You've made your choice, and we won't be here to pick up the pieces. They unfollowed Emma on social media immediately, she showed you, scrolling through Instagram and Facebook and finding herself removed from their digital lives within minutes. They removed her from group chats, erased her from years of shared playlists and photo albums, and essentially ended the friendships over not being allowed to be in a wedding where they'd openly disrespected the groom. The totality of their rejection was shocking in its swiftness and finality. Emma kept checking her phone like she expected them to cool down and reach back out, but days passed with nothing but silence from the people who'd supposedly been her best friends. Emma was devastated by losing her friends, and part of her blamed you even though she'd been the one to have the actual conversation. You could see it in the way she looked at you sometimes, a flash of resentment, a moment of wondering if you'd been worth the loss. The wedding planning continued, but the joy had been sucked out of it. Every conversation about bridesmaids now carried the weight of who wasn't there. Emma replaced Madison, Becca, and Lauren with her cousins and some work friends. Nice women who were honored to be asked, but who couldn't fill the space that 10 years of friendship had occupied. "It's not the same," Emma said one night while addressing invitations. "They were supposed to be here for this. You'd won the battle, but you weren't sure about the war." Emma was hurt and grieving her friendships, and you felt guilty for being the catalyst, even though you knew you'd done the right thing in establishing boundaries. You'd catch her looking at old photos on her phone, scrolling through years of memories with Madison, Becca, and Lauren. You'd hear her crying in the bathroom and know she was mourning friendships that had turned out to be conditional, contingent on her making choices her friends approved of, maintaining a lifestyle that met their standards, choosing a partner they deemed acceptable. The question hanging over everything was whether Emma would eventually resent you for making her choose, or whether she'd come to see that friends who'd demand she prioritize their participation over her partner's dignity were never really friends at all. The wedding day arrived, smaller and more intimate than originally planned, and Emma looked beautiful walking down the aisle in her dress. The ceremony was held at a historic mansion you'd found that fit your budget. With about 80 guests instead of the 150 Madison had insisted was standard. Emma's cousin stood beside her as maid of honor, along with 3 work friends as bridesmaids, and they all looked lovely in the dresses Emma had chosen. But you could see Emma's eyes scanning the crowd during the ceremony, looking for faces that weren't there, mourning the absence of the friends who should have been celebrating with her. When it came time for the vows, when Emma promised to forsake all others and cleave only to you, you wondered if she really meant it, or if part of her would always wish she'd chosen differently. Did she wish she'd chosen someone who could afford the ring her friends thought she deserved? Did she wish she'd chosen the life they'd told her she should want? The luxury cars and designer clothes and Instagram-perfect existence? Her voice was steady as she said the words, but you couldn't shake the doubt that had been planted by months of watching her friends try to convince her you weren't enough. In your vows, you promised to always work hard to provide for her while knowing that might never be enough. In the eyes of people who measured worth in dollars, promised to love her even though you now knew that love might not conquer the materialistic expectations her social circle had instilled. You promised to respect her choices even when they were hard, to support her dreams even when they seemed out of reach, to be the partner she deserved even when others didn't think you were. You meant every word, but you also couldn't help wondering if you were making promises to someone who wasn't sure she wanted what you were offering. The marriage started under the shadow of what had happened, with Emma mourning friendships she'd lost and you wondering if she blamed you for the loss. The first few months were tense in ways your relationship had never been before. Emma would see things that reminded her of her former friends. A restaurant Madison had recommended, a movie Becca had wanted to see, a song that had been on Lauren's playlist, and she'd get quiet and withdrawn. You'd ask what was wrong, and she'd say nothing, but you both knew that wasn't true. The absence of her friends was a presence in your marriage, a ghost that haunted your happy moments. So 6 months into marriage, Emma admitted something that took courage. "I sometimes look at my ring and think about what my friends said. Not because I agree with them. I really don't. But their voices are still in my head sometimes. I'll see someone with a huge diamond and think, Madison would have loved that. Or Becca would say, mine is too small. And I hate that I think those things because I love my ring. I love what it represents. But they're still there, judging me even though they're not in my life anymore." She also admitted she'd caught herself comparing your life to Madison's Instagram perfect existence more than once, that she'd wondered what her life would have looked like if she'd listened to her friends' warnings and ended the engagement. "I wonder if I'd be happier or just have nicer stuff," she said. "If I'd have a bigger ring, but less authenticity. If I'd have luxury vacations, but more pressure to maintain an image. I don't know. And the fact that I wonder at all makes me feel terrible, like I'm betraying you by even thinking about it." The honesty was painful but necessary, the kind of vulnerability that either breaks a marriage or makes it stronger. You told her that you'd never regret kicking her friends out of the wedding because they disrespected both of you, but that you couldn't live in a marriage where you were constantly measured against impossible standards and found lacking. If you're going to be with me, you said carefully, you need to actually choose to be with me. Not some version of me you hope I'll become, not me, with more money eventually, but me as I am right now. I can promise I'll always work hard and do my best, but I can't promise I'll ever make Madison's husband's salary or buy you 3-carat rings or take you to the Maldives. And if that's what you need to be happy, we need to figure that out now before we waste more years, Emma cried. And through her tears, she said something that felt true. I don't want to be the person who needs those things. I hate that they made me question us. I hate that I let them get in my head. When I'm with you, really with you, not thinking about what anyone else would say, I'm happy. I love our life. I love our apartment and our weekend farmers market trips and our movie nights. It's just when I start comparing, when I hear their voices in my head telling me I'm settling, that I get confused. You held her while she cried, and you understood something important. Emma wasn't a villain for having doubts any more than you were a hero for setting boundaries. You were both just people trying to build a life together while navigating external pressures and internalized values that didn't always align with what you actually wanted. The difference was that you were finally being honest about it. Finally naming the poison instead of letting it work silently. Slowly, Emma began to rebuild her perspective, and you watched the work she put into unlearning toxic patterns. She made new friends, ones who valued character over bank accounts, who celebrated your relationship instead of questioning it, who complimented her vintage ring and meant it. She met Maya at a pottery class, and Maya wore a simple gold band as her wedding ring because she and her wife had decided to skip engagement rings entirely and put the money toward their honeymoon. She became close with Priya from work, whose fiancé was a teacher like you, and who talked about their budget wedding planning with excitement rather than embarrassment. She reconnected with college friends she'd drifted from, women who'd never been part of the Madison Becca-Lauren circle and who'd always thought Emma could do better than that friendship. Group, she started unfollowing the influencers and accounts that made her feel inadequate. The ones that posted nothing but luxury hauls and expensive vacations and engagement rings that cost more than cars. She stopped hate following Madison's Instagram, stopped checking to see what her former friends were doing, stopped torturing herself with comparisons. I realized I was curating my own misery, she told you one night. I was following all these accounts that made me feel like my life wasn't enough and then wondering why I felt inadequate all the time. It's like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. She started appreciating the life you were building together instead of comparing it to others. Noticing the flowers you'd bring home on Fridays, the way you'd make her coffee exactly how she liked it every morning, the thoughtful gifts you'd find at thrift stores that reminded you of her. She started posting on her own Instagram again, not performatively, but authentically, sharing moments from your actual life rather than trying to compete with anyone else's highlight reel. Pictures of your adopted cat, of the garden you were planting together, of the bookshelf you'd built, of dinners at home rather than expensive restaurants. This is my life and I love it, she captioned a photo of you both laughing on your apartment couch, dressed in sweatpants with takeout containers on the coffee table. Not picture perfect, just perfectly us. One day, about a year after the wedding, Emma told you something that felt like a turning point. I'm sorry I let them make me doubt us. I'm sorry I didn't defend you the way I should have. You were right to kick them out. They were toxic, and I couldn't see it because I'd been friends with them for so long. I kept making excuses for them because admitting they were bad friends meant admitting I'd wasted years on people who didn't actually care about me, who only valued me as long as I met their standards. That was hard to accept. The apology meant everything, but you both knew the damage had left scars that would take time to fully heal. You'd never forget hearing her friends call your ring trash. Never forget the moment you realized they were trying to sabotage your relationship. Never forget watching Emma hesitate when you'd asked if your modest life would be enough for her. Those memories would always be part of your story, markers of the crisis you'd survived. But you were learning that scars were just evidence of healing, proof that something broken had been repaired even if it didn't look exactly like it had before. Emma suggested couples therapy, which surprised you but which turned out to be incredibly helpful. Dr. Patterson, a therapist who specialized in relationships and family dynamics, helped you both articulate things you'd been struggling to express. She helped Emma understand how her friends had been emotionally manipulative, how they'd used subtle put-downs and concern trolling to undermine her confidence in her own choices. She helped you understand your own insecurity patterns, the ways you'd been carrying a chip on your shoulder about not being wealthy, how that defensiveness sometimes made you interpret neutral comments as attacks. Most importantly, she helped you both understand that you'd been operating under different assumptions about what your marriage would look like, and that those assumptions had never been fully examined or discussed until crisis forced the conversation. Emma had assumed you'd eventually make more money, move into higher-paying work, level up in ways her friends' husbands had. You'd assumed she genuinely wanted the modest, intentional lifestyle you'd discussed, that she'd meant it when she said she valued experiences over possessions. Neither assumption had been malicious, but both had been wrong, and addressing that mismatch directly was the only way forward. The question, Dr. Patterson said during one session, is whether you can build a shared vision that you both actually want, rather than one person compromising or one person hoping the other will change. That became your project over the following months, really talking about money and lifestyle and values, what you were willing to sacrifice for financial security, what experiences mattered enough to save for, what version of success felt authentic to both of you rather than performing for an audience. Looking back 2 years later, you didn't regret the decision to remove Emma's friends from the wedding, though you regretted that it had been necessary in the first place. You regretted that people who were supposed to love and support your fiancée had instead tried to sabotage her happiness because it didn't meet their materialistic standards. You regretted the pain Emma had endured losing friendships she'd valued, even though those friendships had turned out to be conditional and ultimately toxic. You regretted that a symbol of love, the ring you'd chosen so carefully, had been turned into a weapon to make Emma feel inadequate. But you didn't regret standing up for yourself and your relationship. You didn't regret demanding that your partner choose between enabling toxic friends and honoring her commitment to you. You didn't regret the boundaries you'd set or the difficult conversations you'd forced, because without that crisis, you might have spent years slowly eroding under the weight of unspoken resentment and comparison. You might have built a marriage on foundations that couldn't support the weight of real life. The friends who called your carefully chosen ring trash had revealed their own trashy values, the belief that a person's worth could be measured in carats and car models, that love could be quantified by spending, that a meaningful symbol only mattered if it impressed other people. Removing them from your wedding, and by extension from your lives, was the healthiest decision you could have made. Your marriage was more important than their approval, and Emma learning to believe that too was the real foundation you'd built together, worth more than any diamond. Emma still had hard days when she missed her old friends or questioned her choices, when the life she saw on Instagram looked shinier than the one she was living. But she also had good days, more and more of them, when she felt genuinely content with what you'd built together, when she looked at her vintage ring and saw only the love and sacrifice it represented, when she realized that Madison's perfect Instagram life was probably just as curated and complicated as anyone else's. She'd learned that comparison was a trap with no winning outcome, that there would always be someone with a bigger ring or a nicer house or a more exotic vacation, and that chasing that phantom of enough was a guaranteed path to perpetual dissatisfaction. You'd learned things too, that your defensive insecurity about money sometimes made you shut down conversations you should have been having, that providing for your partner wasn't just about finances, but about emotional support and shared decision-making, that being right about someone being toxic didn't mean the aftermath wouldn't be complicated and painful. You'd learned to celebrate Emma's growth without holding her past doubts against her, to acknowledge that she'd been manipulated by people she trusted without making her feel guilty for being susceptible to that manipulation. 3 years into your marriage, Emma ran into Madison at a coffee shop, the first time they'd seen each other since the falling out. Emma texted you immediately, and you could feel her anxiety through the phone. They'd had an awkward conversation where Madison had been coolly polite, mentioning that she and Brad had just bought a house, bigger than yours, more expensive neighborhood, the implications clear, even without saying it directly, and asking with false sweetness how married life was treating Emma. Emma had said it was great, actually, and she'd meant it. She'd shown Madison recent photos on her phone. Your cat, your garden, a selfie from a weekend camping trip, and Madison had looked at them with thinly veiled pity before making an excuse to leave. I thought I'd feel something, Emma told you that night. Jealousy of her life, or validation from her seeing I was happy, or anger about what happened. But I just felt nothing, like she was a stranger. We spent 10 years being best friends, and now I don't even recognize the person I was when I valued her opinion. She twisted her wedding ring, a simple band that matched her engagement ring, vintage styled and perfect. I don't miss her. I don't miss any of them. I just miss who I thought they were, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. You'd both been grieving not the actual friendships, but the idea of them. The story you told yourselves about having loyal friends who'd stand by you forever. The reality hadn't matched the story, and accepting that was part of growing up, learning that not all friendships were meant to last, that sometimes people showed you who they really were and you had to believe them, that choosing yourself and your partner over toxic relationships was an act of strength, not selfishness. Your marriage wasn't perfect. No marriage was, but it was real in ways it might never have been if you'd just gone along with having Emma's toxic friends in the wedding. The crisis had forced conversations and revelations that might otherwise have taken years to surface, and while the path had been painful, you'd emerged with something solid. You'd learned to talk about money without judgment, to discuss doubts without betrayal, to set boundaries without guilt, to prioritize each other over outside opinions. Emma had learned that she was stronger than she'd thought, capable of walking away from friendships that no longer served her, brave enough to choose an authentic life over an impressive one. She'd learned that love wasn't measured in carats, that success wasn't determined by Instagram likes, that happiness came from internal alignment rather than external validation. She'd learned that the right partner would support her growth rather than trying to mold her into someone else, would value her character over her accessories, would choose her even when it meant standing up to people he'd tried for years to get along with. The vintage ring that had caused so much drama became Emma's favorite possession, and she'd tell its story proudly to anyone who asked. Not the story of saving and searching that you'd initially imagined telling, but the fuller story of what it had revealed, what it had cost, what it had ultimately meant. "This ring saved my marriage before the marriage even started," she'd say. "It showed me who my real friends were, helped me figure out what I actually valued, forced conversations we needed to have. Best $3,000 we ever spent." Sometimes new acquaintances would eye the ring and you'd see them making calculations, estimating size and value, comparing it to their own jewelry, perhaps finding it wanting. And you'd watch Emma catch those looks and smile, completely unbothered, because she'd learned that people's judgment said more about them than about her. She'd learned the difference between friends who celebrated with you and friends who competed with you, between people who wanted you to be happy and people who wanted you to be impressive. 5 years into your marriage, Emma's sister got engaged to a man with family money who proposed with a 3-carat ring that probably cost more than your annual salary. At the celebration dinner, Emma examined the ring with genuine happiness for her sister, complimenting the sparkle and the setting without a trace of envy or comparison. Her sister asked slightly nervously, "Do you ever wish yours was bigger?" And Emma had smiled and said, "Not even a little bit. Mine is perfect for me." And she'd meant it completely, without trying to convince herself, without performing contentment she didn't feel. She'd actually arrived at a place where her vintage 3/4-carat ring was exactly what she wanted, where the life you'd built together was exactly what she wanted, where she'd stopped measuring her happiness against anyone else's standards. You thought about Madison. Becca and Lauren sometimes wondered if they ever thought about Emma or felt any regret for how things had ended. You doubted it. People that deeply invested in materialism and status probably saw Emma's choices as confirmation that they'd been right to question the relationship, that she'd settled for less than she deserved by their metrics. They'd never understand that Emma hadn't settled. She'd chosen something real over something shiny, something sustaining over something impressive, something authentic over something curated for social media. That was a value system they couldn't comprehend, so they'd probably never see their role in nearly destroying something beautiful. But their loss had been Emma's gain in unexpected ways. Losing friends who'd only valued her for surface-level attributes had created space for relationships built on substance. Emma had become closer with her sister, with your family, with new friends who saw her clearly and loved her anyway, loved her for her weird sense of humor and her terrible singing and her tendency to cry at commercials, not for her accessories or her husband's job title or her Instagram aesthetic. She'd learned that quality mattered more than quantity in friendships, that 3 real friends were worth more than 10 toxic ones, that being alone was better than being with people who made you feel inadequate. Looking at Emma across the dinner table on your 5th anniversary, same apartment, same modest lifestyle, same vintage ring catching the light, you felt grateful for the crisis that had tested you early. Better to know before the wedding that Emma's friends were toxic. Better to force those conversations about values and expectations before you'd bought a house or had kids. Better to set boundaries when the stakes were high, but the investment was still recoverable. Some couples didn't face their major challenges until they were years into marriage with mortgages and children, and accumulated resentment making it harder to see clearly and choose bravely. You'd chosen each other, really chosen, in a way that went beyond the initial romantic decision to get engaged. You'd chosen each other when it was hard, when outside voices were loud, when doubt crept in, when the path forward required sacrifice. Emma had chosen you over friendships she'd valued, over the lifestyle she'd been told to want, over the version of herself that sought approval from people who didn't deserve influence over her life. You'd chosen her knowing she had doubts, knowing she'd been influenced by toxic people, knowing that marrying her meant signing up for the hard work of building something real rather than coasting on the easy momentum of a relationship that looked good but felt hollow. The ring that had started as a symbol of love, been tainted as a symbol of inadequacy, had transformed into a symbol of survival and choice and growth. It represented not just the proposal and the promise, but the crisis that had refined that promise, the fire that had tested whether your commitment was real or just romantic fantasy. Every time Emma looked at it, she didn't just see the vintage craftsmanship or the sparkle of the center stone. She saw the choice she'd made to value authenticity over approval, to prioritize her marriage over toxic friendships, to define success on her own terms rather than accepting someone else's definition. And every time you saw that ring on her finger, you didn't just see the 3 months of saving and the careful selection. You saw the boundaries you'd set, the ultimatum you'd delivered, the line you'd drawn between acceptable and unacceptable treatment. You saw your own growth too, the ways you learned to communicate directly instead of suffering silently, to demand respect instead of hoping for it, to recognize that enabling bad behavior in the name of keeping the peace wasn't noble. It was cowardly. Your marriage wasn't the one Madison thought Emma deserved, wasn't the impressive Instagram-worthy existence Becca had expected her to have, wasn't the luxury lifestyle Lauren had warned her she'd regret missing. It was something better because it was real challenges and real growth, real intimacy built on real honesty, real partnership where both people chose each other actively and repeatedly, rather than just coasting on autopilot toward a predetermined destination. The friends who called your ring trash had done you both a favor by revealing themselves clearly and early, by forcing a crisis that clarified what mattered and what didn't, by providing a test that, having passed, left you confident in what you'd built together. They'd thought they were protecting Emma from making a mistake, but they'd actually protected you both from the mistake of building a life on foundations that included people who didn't support it, who measured worth in dollars, who'd have been whispering doubts and making comparisons through every milestone and challenge of your marriage. Sometimes the worst thing people do to you ends up being the best thing that happens to you. And being insulted by toxic people was its own form of validation. The fact that Madison, Becca, and Lauren thought you weren't good enough for Emma told you everything you needed to know about their values and nothing you needed to know about your worth. Their judgment had been a gift, painful to receive, but valuable in what it revealed, both about them and about the work you and Emma needed to do to build something that could withstand that kind of pressure. You'd built that something. 5 years in, with Emma laughing at something you'd said and reaching across the table to take your hand, the hand with the ring that had caused so much drama and taught so many lessons, you felt the kind of contentment that doesn't come from having everything you want, but from wanting everything you have. That was the secret Madison and her friends would never understand. The missing piece in their equation of happiness, that accumulation and achievement and impressing others was a treadmill with no destination, while appreciation and authenticity and internal alignment was a foundation you could actually build a life on. The ring that had been called trash had become treasure, not because its monetary value had changed, but because its meaning had deepened with every challenge it had represented, every conversation it had sparked, every choice it had symbolized. It was the ring Emma had said yes to, the ring she defended when defending it mattered, the ring she chose every day when she could have chosen doubt or regret or comparison. And that choosing, that active, repeated, conscious choosing, was what marriage was really about. Not the wedding, not the ring, not the Instagram announcement or the impressive venue or the friends who stood beside you. Just two people choosing each other over and over through doubt and crisis and the relentless pressure of a world that wanted to measure and compare and find you wanting. You'd chosen each other over that world, and in doing so, you'd built your own world. Smaller, maybe. Less impressive to outside observers, definitely, but entirely yours. A world where a vintage ring was perfect, where a modest lifestyle was enough, where love was measured in morning coffee and inside jokes and the way someone looked at you when you'd had a hard day. A world where friends who called that trash were the ones who didn't belong, who couldn't be trusted with the truth of who you were and what you'd built. And in that world, your world, the one you'd chosen and defended and fought for, that ring and everything it represented was priceless.